Welcome back. You're still tuned in to Salam Media. The name of the show is News and Views. And you're with me, Salailo Makwidi, standing in for Julie Ali, who'll be back tomorrow morning for the Wednesday edition of News and Views. But yeah, you're stuck with me today, and we'll be together again on Thursday, and then on Friday, Inaitwadi will be coming back for the Friday edition of News and Views, and he'll also be on air this Wednesday evening on a Wednesday nights with Inayet. And with that being said, it's National Wills Week. It kicks off this week, and we'll be discussing the importance of having a will. This is with Executive Financial Advisor Yaseen Badat, who's joining us via a virtual platform. Yaseen, Jazakallah so much for joining us. Welcome to Salam Media. Always a pleasure having you on board.
Shukran, brother. Thank you very much for having me, and good morning to the listeners. MashaAllah.
I mean, I think first and foremost, the issue of wills is one that particularly us black and brown people are not comfortable talking about. We try and keep it hush hush. It's not a topic that is readily available to be discussed on the dinner table. How do people start getting comfortable with discussing their wills and going about amending them and changing them whenever they feel like it, and be as normal as possible, because it's a very, very important aspect of everyone's lives?
Absolutely. I mean, listen, a will is a very important document that one has to consider as part of not only their financial planning, but as part of their religious requirements as well. I mean, our deen teaches us that we shouldn't go more than 3 days without having our will in order. It also talks to one having their affairs in order, especially in that particular moment when we depart from this world, and that is definitely an eventuality for all of us. It's just a matter of when. But I think from a South African context, especially where we talk about previously disadvantaged members or members that didn't have as much financial education prior to the new age or the dawn of the new era, so to speak, I think it's very important for one to consider that your will effectively ties up your estate, it ties up all your affairs and your matters, and it designates particular people to effectively handle that responsibility. And I think that's very important. So if we, to your first question in terms of where we currently are, I think the long and the short answer to that from my perspective is that if we haven't really taken this seriously after having gone through COVID 2020, 2021, which was most probably the worst period that the world has ever seen in terms of members of our community, our family, our towns, our cities, the global community passing away in such rapid space of times, I think it speaks to the importance of now more than ever one understanding that, listen, we need to get our affairs in order. And I think from a family perspective as well, it talks to, you do not want to leave any complications behind for people that are left behind after you, your heirs, your beneficiaries, etc., etc. And the will does just that. It talks to what do you want upon death? How does your estate then be distributed? How does your estate be split between your heirs and your beneficiaries? We're very fortunate from a Sharia point of view. We have that formula given to us in the Holy Quran, mashallah. But I think it still talks to the importance of having that piece of paper or the document ready, so at least matters can then be expedited, inshallah.
No, definitely. Let's talk about the process now. If someone is just watching or listening to this interview and it's striking a nerve, they realize I don't have my affairs in order. I need to, sort out everything, because you never know. Life happens, and at any moment, unfortunately, you can no longer be with us. Well, what's the process? What's the initial steps that a person can take and ultimately make sure that they have that final document in their hand and it's their will and their affairs are in order?
So we're very lucky in that at least we have a week, now in which highlights the importance of wills, and I think it's a very big reminder for us, first of all. Secondly, it's very important for one to consult with a professional. There are many professionals who can give advice around structuring of wills and ensuring that estates are done in a very, very specific manner. One can speak to attorneys, one can speak to accountants, one can speak to financial advisors like myself. for example, and there are many other individuals out there that are more than capable of effectively holding one's hand and walking through this journey. It is a very humbling experience, but I think for most South Africans, it seems to be an experience that evokes thoughts of morbidity, and oh shucks, I'm talking about death. What if something happens? But the reality is that, listen, if something happens, when something happens to us, I mean, we all have to depart, like we said earlier. This particular piece of paper is effectively the starting point in ensuring that our affairs thereafter are being put to bed or being put to rest in a very amicable way, in a very structured way, and a way that, inshallah, can hopefully terminate in as quick a time as possible. So if we look at the kinds of wills that one can look at, for example, from a Sharia point of view, I mean, like I said, we have predetermined formulas that will effectively talk to distributions. But if we look at conventional wills, we can do single wills, which is will to spouses. You can do a will to parents, for example. If you, for example, don't unmarried, don't have any other siblings or whatever it might be, don't have a family, spouses can do wills to one another. They can bequeath, for example, whatever they have to each other. There are many ways to actually get a will done. I always advise my clients that if nothing is taken seriously where your will is concerned, and you perhaps maybe don't have the time to go and seek a proper guidance or counsel from an experienced professional, then the least we should have is that Jamiatul Ulama has a very nice pre-printed will. It's a 3-page document. You just fill in a few details regarding yourself, who your intended executor might be. It has to be signed and witnessed by 2 people who are not inheriting from your estate, which is very, very important. And that at least is your will done. So if anybody takes any message from today and people are a bit lazy to sort of seek counsel, please, Jamiatul Ulama has a fantastic pre-printed will, obviously on the Sharia side available. And I think that would be a very, very good starting point, inshallah.
And when it comes to misconceptions about creating a will, I'm sure there are a lot that you can maybe just iron out for audiences. A lot of unsure people, people that are not really keen to go about the creating a will for whatever reason. Some misconceptions, and maybe you can give a reality check on them and iron them out for our audience.
So, unfortunately, in matters of death, there's always going to be a debate. There's going to be discussion around inheritance. And I think inheritance is a very sensitive topic amongst South African communities at a very broad level, not necessarily focused on culture, creed, religion, or race for that matter. And I think there will always be misconceptions that, for example, I'm not going to inherit as much as I thought I'm going to inherit, or having a will in place, I'm now handing my affairs over to somebody that's going to take advantage of my heirs and my beneficiaries from a costs and a fees point of view. And I think the biggest misconception in my mind is, listen, I don't need a will. What's this? Why is it necessary for me to actually have a will? But remember, if you look at the wheels of justice and the system, the justice system of South Africa, let's look at the court system, for example. A very simple example is that if a person has to pass away today, right, in the absence of a will, the term that we utilize for that particular person is intestate. So the law of intestate succession then comes into play. That means that the court will then decide, according to a prescribed formula, who will inherit from you. But the process that unfolds to effectively reach milestones after one's death in the event that a will is not put in place, and I'm not exaggerating, it could literally take years before the heirs and beneficiaries of that estate receive any distributions, because unfortunately the courts are overloaded. The master's court is overloaded. The magistrate's courts are overloaded. The master's office is overloaded. So in the absence of a will, the process becomes lengthened unnecessarily. Another misconception is that, listen, if a person dies without a will, then the heirs and beneficiaries will get nothing and all the money will effectively be diluted into the state. That's a big misconception. That money in that particular estate belonging to a particular person in the event that his or her passing has to find its way to the correct heirs and beneficiaries. And that will happen in the event that there's a will in place or in the event that there's no will in place. But having a will in place makes the process more simpler, efficient, and faster in achieving that outcome. In the event that there's no will in place, the wheels will turn, but they'll turn very, very slowly. And in the process, your heirs and beneficiaries will become highly frustrated. And remember, I mean, you're talking about financial matters, right? In very many instances, people are dependent on that money that they have. It's their hak, it's their inheritance, it's their right, you know. So you want to make sure that, as our beloved Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught us, we live life with the methodology of simplicity. We live life with the methodology of effectively making sure that our affairs are handled in a very certain, very intentional manner. I think putting a will in place gives us that same kind of protection, the simplicity and the exact methodology that can unfold when a person passes away.
I want us to take a quick break, but then when we come back, I want us to touch on two very, very important aspects. Number one, how does one go about selecting an executor for their estate? And then secondly, updating your will. How often should you do it and the process of doing it? But we'll touch on those after the short break.
Inshallah. Okay, thank you.
And because the prices are so well trimmed on all gold and diamond jewelry. Alternatively, we could remake your old jewelry into a brilliant new design. Visit Randry Jewelers at 151 Stevens Lamini Road, Musgrave, Durban. Randry Jewelers, the family name you can trust.
Millions displaced, thousands dead, thousands more wounded. Through the genocide, the men, women and children of Palestine need you. Your support enables our team on the ground to deliver life-saving aid. Help Gaza today. Donate to Penny Appeal South Africa, www.pennyappeal.org.za, 031 1100 573. Penny Appeal. Small change, big difference.
Ah, the kitchen, the heart of the home, where memories are made and celebrated. Our go-to place for those freshly stacked pancakes early in the morning or for that late-night snack munchies. We are in there together, cooking, eating and celebrating life together. Let's keep the kitchen a place that is shared by everyone, where we build stronger bonds and grow together. Sunfoil, Now We Cooking. Visit nowwecooking.co.za for recipes that everyone can help make.
Do you feel the pain? Do you still feel 1 year of genocide, 365 days of war crimes and ethnic cleansing spread across Gaza and the West Bank? Over 40,000 civilians killed, over 100,000 injured, and thousands more under the rubble. Housing, hospitals, schools, all destroyed. The bombings and mass murders know no end. International impunity for Israeli racism fuels this genocide, and silence is complicity. We need to do more. We must do more. Join the PSA at the Mass Walk for Freedom on Sunday, 8 a.m., 6 October, Rose Park, Lenasia. Unite against racism. Unite against apartheid Israel. For tickets and to volunteer, simply call 083 258 2786.
Yaseen Badat Financial Advisory. Are your financial goals feeling out of reach? Yaseen Badat Financial Advisory is here to turn your aspirations into achievements. Our dedicated team, armed with a history of success, is ready to guide you through the complex nature of financial and investment planning. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to the game, our personalized solutions cater to your unique goals and risk appetite. Trust in our commitment to transparency, integrity, and excellence. Ready to unlock a world of financial freedom? Partner with us today. Call Yaseen Badat Financial Advisory at +27 33346 2071 or visit www.yaseenbadat.com. Yaseen Badat Financial Advisory, guiding you to financial success.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media coming to you live from South Africa.
Welcome back. You're still tuned in to Salam Media. The time is 9:36, and we're still chatting to Yaseen Badat. He's a financial advisor, and we're talking about wills. This National Wills Week, and before we went onto the break, Brother Yaseen, thank you so much for staying with us. The process of choosing an executor for your will. Firstly, what is an executor? And if you can just outline the process of selecting an executor for your will. How would that look like, and how do you go about it?
So, Jazakallah khair, brother. Thank you very much for having us once again. Again, we have to understand that a will is a very important document that unlocks the processes and the procedures in the event of death to that particular individual. And it's very much like a lock and key, you know. And I think, mashallah, the will becomes the key to unlock that particular estate in a very, very effective manner. And that's how people should understand it. The executor in an estate is a very important individual. This particular individual is nominated by the deceased whilst the deceased is alive, or in some instances, in the event that there's no will in place, an executor can be nominated after death as well. But the best way to do it is while you are alive, you will ensure that you, as the client, as the person, will now nominate a particular person to handle your affairs in the event that you pass away. And that particular person's responsibility will then be termed as the executor in that particular estate. So he will be responsible for making all the decisions, financial and otherwise, on behalf of the deceased. He will be the individual, he or she will be the individual responsible for ensuring that that estate is wound up in a cost-effective manner, and that the proceeds of the estate are then distributed in a very, very equitable manner to the heirs and beneficiaries. So the executor has a very weighty responsibility in ensuring that that estate is effectively round up fairly, in a cost-effective manner, and very, very timelessly as well, such that the heirs and beneficiaries are not jeopardized during the process. The process of nominating an executor, as you mentioned, I mean, listen, everybody has their own sort of perceptions of what they'd like to do. In very many instances, and we see this all the time, parents would nominate kids, for example. Siblings would nominate each other. It's not very uncommon to have your accountant as an executor or an attorney as an executor as well. It has to be somebody responsible, reliable, and trustworthy to effectively make sure that the resources within that estate are not abused. Because like I said, the executor is now the person in charge of the deceased's assets. And you want to make sure that monies are looked after in the most trustworthy manner that's possible. And the person, he or she, it can be multiple executors. So we don't have to have one. You can nominate two, you can nominate three. It does become complicated if you have too many executors from a decision-making point of view. So what we see very, very often is we see two executors, making sure that if in the event that somebody is not available, there's somebody else to pick up the slack. But generally, the executor has that responsibility, and can be any individual that the deceased has that trust in, to make sure that nothing will be taken for granted, inshallah.
No, definitely. And then when it comes to updating your will, is there a separate process that you need to follow? And how often does one need to update their will and make sure that, their affairs are in order and everything is as they want it to be?
So there's two things to consider here when it comes to updating a will. The first thing is that, remember, your current will always supersede any previous will that one may have had. And we see that, or we see this all the time. So a person may have done a will 4, 5, 10 years ago, whatever that may be, and now they're wanting to do a brand new will, you know. And if you do a brand new will today that's dated and signed and witnessed today, for example, then that will and testament would effectively supersede any previous wills and testaments. So that's the first thing one has to consider. In that, if you have an old will and you're not sure where it is, you're not sure who it's with, and that happens, people sort of lose track of these things. One can very easily do a new will and the new will then supersede anything that was done historically. That's number one. Where updating the will is concerned, number two, I mean, a person can update the will as often as they need to, right? But we advise that you update your will when you have major life-changing events. For example, you get married, you have children, you buy property, you get into business, etc., etc., etc. It can happen as often as possible, and generally, the institution or the individual or the financial institution that has that particular will in storage or in their archives will effectively make the amendments to the will that you have, and then those amendments will then be added to the will as final changes, and that obviously document will then be the amended will going forward. So there is a very, very formal procedure that's in place for updating a will, but it can happen. And our advice is that it only happen really when you have major life-altering or life-changing events that unfold throughout your lifetime, inshallah.
I think one aspect that I think is very, very important to note, and that a lot of people need to know is what variables could constitute in a will being invalid. What are those things that when it's all said and done, you're no longer around, they take a look at your will and they say, nope, this one is not it. It doesn't tick all the right boxes.
Yeah, that's a good question. So generally unsigned wills, for example, will be invalid. So it's very, very important that one makes a note to effectively have the will signed and witnessed. And I'm going to say this again. I know we did mention it prior. Witnessed by two individuals that are not inheriting from one's estate. That's a big one. And I think very often we see that, or we've witnessed instances where family members have had wills that were perhaps maybe not signed, not initialed, not witnessed. And I think that renders that particular testament invalid without a doubt. And beyond that, just make sure that in the will, every will or whichever will you decide to do, there will be a conformity. There will be a series of information that's required to effectively render that will valid. For example, nominating an executor. From a Sharia point of view, if you look at a basic Sharia will, what do they ask for? And this is just something for the benefit of our public, our listeners. Your name and ID number, very important. That information cannot be missing in a will. I think it's very important to have that included. We always advise that if you're doing a will, make sure you make a copy of your ID or your smart card, whatever you have currently, and you keep that attached to the will as well, because it's quite weird, when people pass on, it's the simplest of documents that become the hardest to find, bank cards, ID documents, etc., etc. So make sure you keep certified copies of those documents attached to the will. So Allah forbid anything does happen, your beneficiaries, your heirs, your executor knows where everything is kept, and everything is kept sort of with all the requirements that are necessary. Nominating an executor in the Sharia will or in any will is very crucial. So make sure that a lot of thought is put into who that executor will potentially be. And the other thing that is very, very important for young parents as well is considering guardianship. If we have young kids and in the eventuality that something happened to both husband and wife, both spouses, who do we want to effectively become guardians of our children? To make sure that responsibility is fulfilled. Now, obviously, those conversations cannot happen at the point of the event, right? A person can't open the will and be surprised that, listen, you're the guardian of my child. We encourage people to have the conversations with their family members or with those people whilst they're alive. So listen, brother, I've nominated you as my executor. I have full faith and trust in you, and I know that you'll do right by my family. Will you accept? Thank you very much. Please can I have a copy of your ID. It's good to keep a copy of the executor's ID as well. And the same applies with guardianship. Listen, if something happens to my wife and I, we are going to need guardians for our children. We couldn't think of somebody better than yourself or yourselves, whatever it might be. Are you guys prepared to take on that responsibility? So those questions, as much as we often, again, like I said earlier, it's very morbid to think about these things. But the reality, if you're looking at what's happening around us, brother, I mean, life changes in a split second, and Allah protect everybody. Allah bless everybody with a long life and good health, inshallah, ameen. But if that event were to occur, we need to be prepared. And the best preparation is ensuring that we have our will and our financial affairs in order, inshallah, ameen.
I think, this might sound as a simple question, but it's very, very important. Where do you keep your will, because it's a private document. You don't want it flying around willy-nilly. It might be tampered with. Where do you keep it, and to make sure that it's still safe but also not too hard to find once you're deceased?
So our advice to clients is always make sure that there's multiple copies, first of all. So you do have financial institutions these days that will charge you a safe custody fee, or in some instances there's no custody fee at all, and it's a very minimal fee if it is charged. So if you did your will, for example, with a bank or a financial institution, what they will then do is they will hold that will in safe custody, so they'll have a copy, basically, right? You'll have a copy, very, very important. And then we always advise clients that, listen, give copies to your accountant if you have one, your attorney if you have one, your financial advisor. We insist that we keep copies of our clients' wills at our office as well, because again, like I said, in that instance of death, the simplest things have become the hardest to find, and families now scurrying around looking for wills and looking for IDs. And I think it's important that we be very, very cognizant of this, is ensure that as many people as you trust. I'm not saying it must go to everybody now. 2 or 3 people that you trust must have a copy, that they can effectively ensure that if anything happens, they can produce that particular will. And I think that's very, very important, to make sure that it's kept safely, number one, and with people that are responsible and reliable enough to effectively produce that will in the event that something happens to you, inshallah.
I mean, Brother Yaseen, unfortunately, we have run out of time. For those that would like, to start this process, they've thought about it. How can they get hold of you? Your contact details, and where else can they find you if they need your assistance in drafting themselves a will?
Listen, they can contact us. Our office number is 033 346 2071, or they can go onto our website. That's www.yaseenbadat.com, www.yaseenbadat.com, and all our details are on there. And they can reach out and we can set up a consultation, and hopefully we can assist them with this very, very critical part of their financial planning requirement, inshallah.
I mean, that was Yaseen Badat, financial advisory. And I think it's very, very important conversation. Well, not very, very comfortable to have, but very, very important. And I think this week, National Wills Week, I think it's one of those, maybe just give yourself time, study what is required. How can you go about drafting yourselves a will? And then maybe seek professionals like Brother Yaseen, who'll be glad to help you. But I'm going to leave it here, Brother Yaseen. Jazakallah so much for giving us your time. Really, really appreciate your insights on this very, very important topic.
Shukran, brother, to you and to all the listeners, and have a wonderful day ahead, inshallah.
I mean, there you have it. Yaseen Badat, financial advisory, National Wills Week. Important, because I think, in our communities at least, Black and brown people, as I mentioned before, very, very uncomfortable topic to talk about. Seems as very taboo, but we've seen some of the struggles when a person has passed away and they don't have a will that properly documents, who gets what and who gets a share of their estate once they pass away. And that unfortunately creates, fighting within the families, because it's not clear, and everyone feels like they're entitled to something because you didn't set your affairs in order. And to avoid such situations, I think drafting a will could be, the best thing that you do, not only for yourselves, but also for your loved ones. And I think I liked what Brother Yaseen pointed out there, that if you're a young parent, you young couple, you can also on your will draft a guardianship for your kids, if something should happen to you whilst they're very, very small. So I think it's important. It's not just about the assets, but it's also about your little kids that you might leave behind, and to make sure that you already know who would be responsible to take care of them if you're no longer around. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, News and Views continues.